what the fuck? I mean, that was our government doing that. It's just sick. We got to fix it. I mean, these people cannot fail fast enough. I'm fed up. To me, it's a mission. It's absolutely a mission to spread the word and, get people pissed off so that, we're marching on the Eccles building down in DC, to end the goddamn Federal Reserve. I mean, it's beyond the pale. And by the way, these people know that what they're doing is wrong. They absolutely know it. They know that what they're doing is wrong. But they can get away with it because nobody's calling them on it. That's the beauty of the internet, right? And that's the beauty of books, and that's the beauty of passing knowledge around. All we got to do, I mean, we outnumber them enormously. They got their hands on all the levers of control, but we're taking that away too because, they say, well, we can tax you, we can grab your Bitcoin, we can do that. Oh, yeah? Molan Labey, you motherfuckers. I mean, I've got 12 words. You can't take my money. That's the beauty of this system. We finally got a weapon that allows us to actually destroy their system, by the way, it needs to be destroyed. It really does.
Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. The Bitcoin time chain is 855-106, and the value of one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin. Shocker. Today's episode is Bitcoin Talk, where I talk with my guest about Bitcoin and whatever else comes up. Today, that guest is the one and only Lawrence Lepard. Larry is just an awesome guy. I love talking to him, and he has a seemingly endless wealth of knowledge. We cover a ton of different topics. We talk about the takeaways from the Bitcoin conference, the Bitcoin strategic reserve, and all the geopolitical implications of it, the massive shift in the Overton window that we've seen recently, general fiat fuckery like the military-industrial complex, three-letter agencies, etc., the absolutely rampant corruption amongst our government and central bank, the Federal Reserve Cartel, and a heck of a lot more. Larry also goes on a couple of absolutely fire rants that I know you are going to love. And fair warning, we do swear a lot in this episode. If you're a first-time listener, perhaps you didn't know that, but if you've listened to a few of these shows, you're well aware of what's coming. So if you are scared of swear words, you may not like this episode. Again, fair warning. Now, that said, by the time you finish, I think it's safe to say that you will be fired the fuck up at all the fiat fuckery going on in this world and ready to peacefully burn this motherfucker down. Figuratively speaking, of course, so that we can build a better system based on Bitcoin from the ashes of this fiat world. Before we dive in, do me a favor and subscribe to the Bitcoin Podcast wherever you're listening or watching, and check out my sponsor Bitbox in the show notes, or you can just go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker to get yourself 5% off the fully open source Bitcoin-only Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. You can also grab links to protect yourself from SIM swap attacks using Afani and Cloaked Wireless. You choose. I am a one-man show, so when you use my partner links, it genuinely helps me keep this show running, and I really appreciate it. If you'd rather watch this show than listen, you can head to the show notes for links to watch on YouTube, Rumble, and Nostr via Highlighter. But if you're like me and you prefer to just listen to your podcast while doing something else, I highly recommend you check out Fountain.fm. Not only can you send Bitcoin to your favorite podcasters to give value for value, but you can earn Bitcoin just for listening to this fucking podcast. And if you're already ahead of the game listening to the Bitcoin Podcast on Fountain, consider giving the show a boost or creating a clip of something you found interesting. Finally, if you are a based Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, hit me up on social media or through the website bitcoinpodcast.net. Without further ado, let's get into this Bitcoin talk with Larry Lepard. Larry, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Walker, really nice to be with you.
Well, you've been on a lot of podcasts. I think that's fair to say. That's all right. I mean, you and Lynn. I think anytime you guys are on a podcast, I always see the YouTube thumbnail or the episode title. It's always something very like everyone is screwed and doom and doom. And
no, we're not. There's a lot of good stuff going on, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I always, I just always think that's funny. But I suppose it's just it's pandering to the algorithm a little bit.
Maybe, yeah.
But so there's a lot of stuff I want to get into with you.
Well, I've got as much time as you like.
All right, that sounds great to me. But so let's start out first because a few people had written and said they wanted to hear about this. You were a gold bug, are a
Yeah.
gold bug,
Yeah.
but you are also a hardcore Bitcoiner who's
Yeah.
hugely vocal about why you are a hardcore Bitcoiner.
Absolutely.
But can you just start us off with who are you? How the heck did you get here today? And how did you bridge that gap from gold bug to Bitcoiner, which seems to be a chasm that not everyone crosses?
Peter Schiffser hasn't crossed it. Yeah. Yeah, sure. I think a lot of people have heard this, but so I've been an investment manager my entire life. I graduated from business school and went into the investment management business. I was a venture capitalist investing in technology because technology, in my view, is going to save us all and change the world. It's really positive what's going on. And, even though we're in a rough period here, I really want to portray, the optimism and the cheerful and constructive stuff that Saylor talks about. And so I invested in technology from the early 80s all the way up to the mid 2000s, and my big wins were in the internet. Had one of the first internet IPOs, a company called Netcom. And to me, technology's changing the world. It's a great area to invest in, and I love it. And maybe that background is why I was a gold bug that was able to adopt Bitcoin very quickly, because Bitcoin's technology, which I'd done. But throughout all of that, my grandfather was a real old stodgy guy, and he owned gold, and he was very critical of FDR taking away the gold when he was much younger. Yeah, and he just said, the goddamn dollar is fiat, and it's not going to last, and they're printing the shit out of it. And I mean, this was a long time ago. This is way before Bitcoin was invented. And so I kind of grew up with a gold bug background, thinking that knowing that fiat was a broken system, knowing that Keynes was wrong, knowing that what Nixon did in 71 was deeply wrong, and understanding that sound money is the moral basis of a sound society, and that since we drifted away from sound money, I think a lot of things have gone wrong since 1971. And as you and I discussed before the show, I'm actually writing a book on that to try and kind of explain what I think has gone wrong and why it's gone wrong. But to me, the going off the gold standard in 71 was a really bad thing. It's been really bad for this country. And I can still remember the 70s, and there were some things wrong then too, including the Vietnam War. But it was a much better country. The CEOs made 4 times or 5 times what the guy working on the assembly line made, not 400 times. And there was a broad middle class, and one wage earner could support a family, and it was just a better time, a better country. It wasn't the way it is today, and so I remember all that. But bridging it to the Bitcoin thing. So I was a gold bug, always have been a gold bug, but I was investing in technology. So that's kind of the general background. And then, what happened to me is I did all these internet investments and did well. And I kind of semi-retired after the internet bubble, because I could see that bubble bursting. I even played the bursting of the bubble. And I was coaching my kids' sports teams. I know you just had your son, and congratulations. I'm very happy for you, Apollo, et cetera, for you and Carla. And, I was watching what was going on, and then the GFC happened, and it was like, holy shit, I mean, the response, Bernanke's response to the GFC was just shocking to me. We're going to take interest rates to zero, we're going to print $2 trillion, $3 trillion, and I realized that the money I had probably wasn't going to last me into my 90s, which I hope to make it there, and I had to go back to work, and so I pivoted from being a technology investor to investing in gold and silver mining stocks. And I was very fortunate. I was involved with the Ron Paul movement. I ran a couple of newspaper ads to support him. And all the Ron Paul guys were talking about Bitcoin. And I was kind of like, yeah. And I had followed the prior attempts, eCash, and there were a couple of others. I don't recall the names now. But as we all know, there was an etymology of Bitcoin pre-Bitcoin. And they all failed. The double spend problem had gotten them. And so somebody came along and said, hey, you got to do this Bitcoin thing. It's going to be freedom money. It's not controlled by the government. And I was like, yeah, that's bullshit. We've tried that. It hasn't worked. And, it was a natural mental response, but it started working, and the pizza got done, and I wasn't paying attention. And, Max was talking about it, and I wasn't paying attention. And then it kind of got to $100 a coin. And I went, Jesus, maybe there's something here. And this is like 11, 12, something like that. And I started paying attention, and I actually started filling out the forms for Mt. Gox. And fortunately, I didn't send them the money. Right before I was about to send them the money, they failed. Although even, I've heard even people who had fiat there have actually I heard over at the conference that somebody who had fiat there got 135 times their fiat money back, even though they only got 16% of their original coins back. Isn't that interesting? They lost
Wow.
they lost 84% of their coins, but the 16 that they had gave them 135x the fiat they had contributed. Isn't that amazing?
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's interesting data. But anyway, so Coinbase came out and with a public offering, and backed by reputable venture capitalists in San Francisco. And okay, this is the way I can buy Bitcoin. I started buying Bitcoin. Not a lot, because I still had that fear that the technology wasn't going to work. And, the halving, the difficulty adjustment, all the things that we now understand intrinsically. I didn't know any of those. I didn't understand any of those because I just hadn't taken the time. And, Safe hadn't written his book yet. And I was going to conferences, and I was going down to the MIT Bitcoin Forum and sitting with core developers, and I'm saying, hey guys, how's this thing looking? And they're like, it's interesting, it's a good experiment. And I say, do you worry about it? I say, yeah, I worry about it all the fucking time. I make a change and I think it might blow up. And I'm like, okay, can't put too much money there. But, I kept buying coins, small amounts. And then, of course, 17 happened and it really took off. And I was like, oh my God, I missed it. And I chased it right up to the top in 17. And then that run burst, went down to 10,000, I doubled down, and went down to 4,000, I doubled down again, because I just believed in the technology. We had hash wars, and that scared me about the technology. But, it just, what happened to me anyway is that as I saw more and more blocks go off without any problems, I got more and more convinced that this is technically sound. And one could actually argue that it's a safer bet today, maybe not as asymmetric a bet, but a much safer bet today than it was back then, because it was Wild West back then. So, what made it to me more interesting than gold, which also goes up with monetary debasement and will continue to go up with monetary debasement because it's been money for 5,000 years. 8 billion people know it's money, and of course it'll eventually be demonetized by Bitcoin. But I say eventually, as in decades, not days. What got me more interested in gold is it had two things going on. It had the ability to, well, one, it was ultimately going to be sounder on a stock to flow basis because of 21 million cap. And as we all know, the amount of gold will double in the next 60 years. The amount of gold on the planet will mine, as much as we've already mined. So, the idea of a fixed cap was very, very intriguing with a lower stock to flow. And the other thing was just the adoption curve, just the recognition that this had gone from pennies on the pizza transaction to dollars, to hundreds of dollars, to thousands of dollars. And, honestly, I don't see any reason why that trend isn't going to continue. I'm sure we're going to $1 million a coin, and then to 5, and then to 10. We all saw Saylor's numbers down at the show this last week, and I don't think he's wrong. There's a band within which, you can be, and I don't know if he's going to hit the high end of that band, but to me, this is really pretty simple. This is a better monetary technology, and it really solves an enormous problem. As I'm writing my book, I was working on it today. For 5,000 years, for all of recorded history, there's never been any form of money that couldn't be diluted. Think about that. Even gold, there's dilution. Here you have a form of money with zero dilution beyond 21. That's just, it blows your mind. And so, recognizing that, I recognize this is a different beast, a different animal, a new invention. And it's like Saylor says, there was flight before they broke the sound barrier, and then there was flight after they broke the sound barrier. They're two different things. So to me, I've really heavily pivoted, and I still maintain a foot in the gold camp, and I still have a fund with a lot of investors who are counting on me to make the money in gold stocks, and I will. But over time, I'm obviously leaning very heavily into the Bitcoin world, and eventually will probably be much less involved in the gold world. The role of gold, in my view, it's analog sound money. Bitcoin's digital sound money. The role of gold, in my view, is it doesn't require ongoing energy to stay alive. In other words, the way the Bitcoin network does, which I don't think is a problem, but it does. And it doesn't have the historical volatility of Bitcoin, although I think that will dampen out in Bitcoin. But, some of my investors are quite old, and when you have an old investor and 70, 80 years old, and they're putting millions of dollars with you, they don't want to put millions of dollars into an asset that can go down 50% because their time window isn't that long. So, if you're 30 years old and your asset goes down 50%, you got another, 40 years to go, and it'll come back. You don't worry about it. But so gold to me represents a less volatile form of sound money with much less upside and much less volatility than Bitcoin. So that's how I reconcile it. I love both the people in both camps. I try to support the people in both camps because I think the important thing that they both share is a hatred for the fractional reserve banking and the fiat system, which is run by a bunch of evil criminals that have really ruined the world and caused enormous misery, pain, and wars over the last 50 years. And that shit just disgusts me. And so anybody who's on the other side of that shit, even if it's old-fashioned gold, they're my friend. And as I say, I've taken it upon myself it's a challenge to me to orange pill gold bugs. I mean, to me, gold is like, marijuana. It's like the gateway drug to get people into Bitcoin, which is heroin. If you really want to get a buzz, you got to be on Bitcoin. So, I don't know. That's kind of a mouthful answer to your question, but does that take you where you wanted to go?
It sure does. I like the gateway drug analogy, and thankfully Bitcoin is slightly less destructive, I think, than heroin,
That's
which is good.
I wouldn't advocate using. I don't drink alcohol and I don't use drugs. I wouldn't advocate any of that kind of behavior, but I think it's a good analog in the sense of the path along of adoption. So.
No, and it's kind of a perfect segue too, and I appreciate the background. Again, this is a safe space for rants that run on as long as you want. So there's no judgment here. I love it.
You're going to get that with me.
I sure did. I was looking forward to it. But so I wanted to dig in a little bit because we're talking about here both Bitcoin and gold, both forms of sound money. We are now at a time where it seems that money is incredibly unsound. We are.
And how? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it feels that we're at, and perhaps this is how every generation feels. I'm of a younger generation, but it feels like we're on this precipice of like, wow, shit is about to really hit the fan. And of course, much shit has been hitting that fan and spraying through it this whole time. So I don't even know what shit hitting the fan more looks like. But we have also these, what some would say are maybe glimmers of hope when it comes to governments looking at ways to actually operate in a more sound way. Now, I know gold bugs for many years have been saying, the government's got to go back to a gold standard at some point, right? It's got to go back to it because it will fall apart. This machine will break down if it doesn't. Now we have, as we saw at the Bitcoin conference, you have folks like RFK explicitly saying we're going to establish a Bitcoin strategic reserve. You've got Trump saying it as well, not quite as explicitly, but we're going to keep the Bitcoin that we have. How much of that is owned by Bitfinex is a different story, but still saying at least we're not going to sell any Bitcoin. We're going to keep any we acquire in the future. And then Senator Cynthia Lummis actually holding a bill up there on stage, which she then released, saying that, no, I'm going to make this explicit. We are going to establish a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And this is a bill. This isn't just a campaign promise. This is a bill that she's putting out there. So I want to just kind of get your thoughts more generally on, your take on all. This was a historic conference.
It was.
Undoubtedly historic.
Absolutely.
You've got a couple Democrats, to be fair, more Republicans, and an independent presidential candidate there as well. It was historic. There was a lot said. But talk is cheap. What's your read on all of this? How this actually plays out? What was your feeling coming out of the conference?
Well, it was extremely positive, and it was a very political conference, as you and I discussed. I mean, and that's because it's an election year. I'm guessing next year in Las Vegas, we won't necessarily attract as much political attention, right?
Yeah.
Let's not kid ourselves. Politicians, they live for votes, and that's certainly why Trump was there. I think Bobby was there probably on a more principled level, or principled basis. But look, the Overton window is shifting. I mean, if somebody had told you a year ago you would have 2 out of the 3 presidential candidates at your conference praising what you're doing, you'd have said, I don't believe it, right? So, I mean, this is a big, big change and big positive. Even though Trump doesn't fully understand what he's talking about, he went from hating it and not believing in it. I mean, I think Vivek and some others orange-pilled him to understanding that this is strategically important. I'm guessing Vivek was smart enough. The way he probably did is he said, hey, look, China's going to beat us on this. And there's nothing Trump hates more than getting beat by China. So his view was like, okay, no, there's no way I'm going to let those guys get it. So, it's an incredibly positive movement. It's interesting, Walker. I think honestly, in the longer run, I'm not even going to, I think we're going to go through so many changes that I'm not even sure it's necessarily going to matter what nation states think, because we're going to get totally decentralized. And we're all going to just kind of, quote unquote, do what we want. And these nation states, they're all going to kind of die. And I don't know if that means a dissolution of the United States, or if we break into segments, or regions, or it's hard to see. This is a big fourth turning, and it's hard to see exactly how it's going to unfold. But the thing that has me extremely optimistic, I was just writing this portion of the book I'm working on, is just how rapid this technological decentralization is occurring. I mean, it's like, wow. And furthermore, as you were saying in your lead into the question, boy, shit is really breaking, and shit's happening fast now. And look, you have the chairman of the president of the you have the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board citing Stein's law, which is Stein's law is if something cannot go on forever, it will end. And he's saying this fiscal path is unsustainable. And so that just blows my mind. I mean, that was not on my bingo card, right? So he's sitting there saying, okay, Jay, so what are you going to do about it? I mean, and then you've got guys at the top like a Larry Fink, who is just the ultimate Fiat master and not somebody I particularly admire, but kind of realizing that he's got to bend the knee because, oh my God, this thing's going to take over. And so, it's really, we're on the cusp of that really rapid adoption, in my opinion. Kind of the Malcolm Gladwell curve, where you get to a 10% inflection point, and then boom, everybody knows that you need it. I mean, that's what Nashville felt like to me. I mean, a couple of years before, we were all down there, cheering on, Jack as he had orange pilled Bukele, and El Salvador was going to go on the Bitcoin standard, and that was fabulous. We had a nation state. I mean, now we've got the biggest nation state talking about it. You got Lummis introducing a bill, et cetera, et cetera. So, you got Jason Lowry being cited in RFK's speech. I mean, the strategic importance of it. So, you've got the ETFs. I mean, since, you and I have last done a podcast, I mean, the ETFs have been approved. I mean, as Saylor pointed out, and I know this was to be true with me too. When I would try and orange pill wealthy friends, their response, even if I could get them to accept the premise that it was a good thing, their response was, yeah, but the government's going to kill it. Well, the government just approved an ETF. So that argument's kind of off the table now. Look, when it gets to be existential and they realize the dollar is failing, and particularly if Kamala wins and Warren is her Treasury Secretary, maybe we've got a 6102 risk. But for now anyway, the government is, in my view, being pretty friendly towards it, and we're not Kamala or not Warren and Biden, but all the candidates. And I don't know who's going to win this election, but I certainly, if Trump wins the election, I don't think we're going to have much trouble in this area. So, to me, the big thing that the conference showed is that this Overton window has shifted, and that fits in nicely with my overall macro thesis, which is it's getting really interesting now. I mean, they cannot stop this spending. They cannot stop this debt accumulation. We're over 35 trillion. We when COVID came along, they upped the spending by 2 trillion, and you get it. I mean, whether it's right or wrong, and COVID was fake, but whatever. You can kind of understand how and why they did it. But what you would think in a normal system, okay, that emergency's over, spending goes back down. Well, no, it hasn't. It just keeps on growing, and so and that's the way these parabolic moves happen, and so Jay Powell is going to be forced to print more money because, as Lynn has so brilliantly pointed out, nothing stops this train, right? I mean,
yes.
The fact of the matter is that you cannot support this level of debt without having more underlying monetary units, and there's only one place those can come from, and that's a combination of the Fed and the banks. And so, they're trying to pretend like they don't have to do it, but they're going to do it. And as always, the Fed's probably going to wait. They'll be behind the curve, and they're going to wait until something is going to break. And it feels to me like we can't make it for another year and a half without something breaking. But I could be wrong. I mean, when Silicon Valley broke, and that was something breaking, they violated the law. They violated Dodd-Frank. They changed the rules, and they saved it. And so they kicked the can. So they do have all of the tools and the megaphone. And, most of the sheep are pretty willing to kind of play along with their game. But I think, they've got more and more cracks in their armor, and they're fighting a losing game. I mean, my guess is Jay Powell is sitting there thinking to himself, why the hell did I take the second term? And God, May of 2026 can't come fast enough because I want to get the fuck out of here.
I wouldn't
So
blame him, Yeah.
right.
Well,
So
there's a couple things I want to dig into with on that, because one is the can being kicked down the road. But maybe before we get onto that, just because we did just hit 35 trillion in
right.
national. Congratulations, everyone. We did it.
Yeah, right.
Nice
Yeah.
number, 35 trillion.
We had an
And
11 trillion in 4 years. It took over 200 years to get the first 11 trillion. We did it in 4 years. Yeah.
So to your point of everything kind of accelerating, right?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit? Something you've talked about a good amount on other shows I've seen you on, and just in general, is that kind of debt doom loop, or I think Lavish would call it, the debt spiral.
Yeah,
But
James has done a great job of laying that out. So let's just talk about kind of the math here. So as we all know, when they run a deficit, they have to pay for it. To pay for it, they have to issue debt. And somebody's got to buy that debt. You got to find a sucker at the card table, as Groman says. And so, and in the past, it was a petrodollar, and originally the Saudis and all those guys would recycle the debt, and then it became China, when we let them into the WTO in exchange for them buying the debt. But all those guys aren't buying the debt anymore, and so, what happens is we're having a hard time finding buyers for the debt, and what that means is that intrinsically interest rates go up. And if interest rates go up, then that makes the deficit larger. And the deficit being larger means you got to sell more debt, but selling more debt makes the interest rates go up more. So you can kind of see where I'm going here. It's rinse, wash, repeat until the whole damn thing blows up. And, and this is not that unusual. If you read Dalio's Debt Crisis book, if you read Reinhardt and Rogoff and a number of other books about this, this has happened in many countries. This has happened in Venezuela. This has happened in Zimbabwe. This has happened in Brazil multiple times. It's happened in Argentina. It's kind of happening now in Turkey. Countries that can print currency, this is the fundamental problem, right? If they start to incur debts, originally the debt's productive, but eventually it becomes less productive, and then they have to issue more debt to pay for the old debt. And it's like a family that's taken out new credit cards to make the payments on the old credit cards. And eventually, somebody said, well, we're not giving any more credit cards. And in this case, the powers that be that are running the system, though, they kind of think, well, we can just, it's not a problem because we have a printing press and we can always print the money. But, what the caution I would say to that is Gresham's law says that once everyone figures out that you can never stop, they're not going to think the money is money good. And so if you study the history of hyperinflations in other countries, they occur when everyone loses faith. And we're getting really close to that area right now. I think there are very few people in the country who aren't aware that we have an inflation problem. And I think the very smart people in the country are really aware that it's probably not solvable without a lot of inflation or a complete collapse. I think there's some portion of the population that thinks, well, okay, fine, but I'll believe the narrative. It's going to get better. But here's the, I was trying to be an optimist earlier. Here's the pessimistic side of this. It's not going to really get better anytime soon. And in fact, there's going to be a real painful period here as it gets substantially worse, in my opinion, in the next 5 years. And I'm going to kind of talk about that in the book and how to play it. But it's once you're in one of these things, you really can't get out. I think we had crossed the event horizon. There was a time, there's a time to turn back. In 2008, some people say to me, well, hey, Larry, what would you have had them do in 2008? Come on, if they hadn't done it, the whole system would have collapsed, right? The ATMs wouldn't work. And that's the game the bankers always play, right? They basically, they come at you, they put a gun to your head and they say, print more money, give me more money, or I'm going to blow up the system, right? And it really is kind of blackmail. And the Fed has been a blackmail artist since its inception. And so, here's how I would have handled it. I talk about this in the book too. Okay, fine. If that's, I want to be the negotiator for the government. All right. So you guys want to bail out to make the ATMs work? Okay, great. We're going to give you a bailout. We're going to protect all the depositors. We're going to make sure the ATMs work, all of that. But here are our conditions, and they're not negotiable. And if you don't accept them, we're going to let you all fail. You're going to give back 3 years of your salary and stock options. Your entire board of directors is going to resign. Everybody at a C-suite level and above, they're going to resign. And we're going to go out and we're going to recruit small town bankers from all over America to come into JP Morgan and all these big banks. We're going to let them run it and clean it up. And all you guys are all fired. Now, if that had happened, we might have been able to go the other direction. We might have gone back to more of a sound money system. But that didn't happen. We bailed them all out. They paid themselves $20 billion of bonuses in 2008. And all those people are part of the powers that be that fund the machine, that give huge donations to the people that keep the system running the way the system is running. And the rest of us, we are kind of the screwies. I mean, they're the screwers and we are the screwies. And that's why the wealth inequality is just so outrageous. I mean, how is Ken Griffin, a guy who basically just moves around paper in a hedge fund, how's he worth $37 billion so that he's able to spend $47 million on a dinosaur? I mean, this shit it just blows my mind. It's so surreal. I mean, these guys got nothing on Marie Antoinette. I mean, this is French Revolution kind of shit, right? I mean, it really is out of control. And I was just reading this morning that we're spending $1 billion supporting illegal aliens or illegal immigrants into the state of Massachusetts. Massachusetts state is spending $1 billion a year supporting people who've come here illegally, and yet I know of cases where we've got homeless veterans on the streets. I mean, it's just like, what the fuck? This society is so goddamn broken, and it's all because of the fiat money. And I do believe there's a God, and I do believe he's going to come down and wreak vengeance on all these fiat assholes. I mean, he's going to make this fiat money worthless. And, then the rest of us, the remnant of this country, the people who are the workers and the honest folks, we're going to rise back up, and we're going to start transacting with each other and adding value, and we're going to use an honest currency to do it. And the most logical, honest currency with which to do it is Bitcoin, and that's what's going to happen. So it's a very optimistic story at the end. But honestly, the next 5 to 10 years, might be pretty turbulent. And but I'm with Saylor. We have to be cheerful and constructive, and try to figure out how to get through it.
Now, a funny thing that I always see, and I see this from a lot of like the MMT crowd.
Oh God!
I know. But they say things to folks like you or to other people who they call like dollar doomers or whatever they use.
Yeah,
they
right.
say, well, you've been calling for a collapse for however many years, and look, everything's still fine. Of course, we know it's not actually fine, and many people are really struggling. They're fine,
of course,
but the system is not, and neither are the people in it. But I mean, is it just that they can't see the fourth turning happening while they're in the middle of it, or are they just genuinely so bought in to this hyper Keynesianism of MMT that they actually believe no, $35 trillion in debt is a good thing because public debt is just a private surplus, as they say, which is just insanity.
I don't honestly know. I mean, in most cases, I think they're not very intellectually bright, but I mean, look, to a guy who jumps off a building, he's flying for the first, 98 floor, 100-story building. For the first 98 floors down, he's flying. I mean, he's just up there in the air, and it's all good, but it doesn't end well. And so, yes, I mean, we've been calling for this for a while, but it's because you could just, it's a bet that's very highly probable in its outcome, but it's more difficult to predict in its time frame. But I would suggest to you that, in 71, there was a big inflationary burst of going off the gold standard. They got it back in the can. That kept it going for quite some time. Then 98, we had LTCM blow up. That was the first eruption. Then, we had 2008, that was a bigger eruption. Then we had COVID, that was an even bigger. So the contractions, if this is like childbirth, which you're familiar with now, the contractions are getting closer together, and they're getting larger in size. I mean, it took Bernanke, 7 years to print $3 trillion. It took Powell, 18 months to print $5 trillion. So, I mean, round numbers. I don't have exact figures, but the point is that, and I mean, everyone was bitching about Reagan's budget deficits in the 80s. I mean, they were $100 billion a year. We're running a deficit now that's 20x that. We're running a $2 trillion deficit annually. So, it's gotten larger and larger at scale. And, when it'll happen, I don't know. And I've been dead ass wrong about thinking it'll happen faster than it will, because I can definitely see what's going on. And perhaps I'll continue to be wrong, and this won't get resolved till 2050. I certainly hope it goes faster. I mean, the fourth turning model would suggest that it's coming sooner. But my prediction today is that this is all going to get sorted out between 2028 and 2035. Because I mean, what it takes to have it sorted out, sadly, because nobody's forward thinking and willing to, well, some people are forward thinking. We talk about Lummis and all, but people won't go here where we are until they really experience pain, and they won't really experience pain until everyone comes to recognize what's going on, and they want out of the money that we're using, and that's happening, but it's still early days. So I don't know. I mean, if we're let's call money failure a baseball game. I mean, I'd say we're in inning two. And it might be an extra inning game. So, so we got a ways to go, but it's coming. You can just see it. You can see the pattern. So,
No,
is that helpful?
Absolutely. And one thing that uh, I I struggle with a little bit, and I'd love your thoughts on this. Is okay.
Yeah.
The U.S. is obviously in a precarious position.
Yeah.
That said, to steal an analogy that Greg Foss uses, it's the prettiest horse at the glue factory still.
Absolutely.
If we're looking at it like that. And you've talked previously about how Americans have really been coddled in a lot of ways because we have not had a recent hyperinflation episode.
Right.
It's similar to
You got to go
Gladstone's
back to the
point.
Continental, which was the founding of the country, right?
Right. And
or Civil War had a lot of inflation, but
Sure.
it wasn't hyper. Yeah.
So in living memory, we don't
Right.
have one. Gladstein talks about that check your financial privilege all the time, both
Right.
with access to services, but then also in terms of you are watching your currency get cut in half or worse overnight. And we haven't
Absolutely.
really had that.
No.
And so I think it's difficult for a lot of Americans to actually understand that that's a very real possibility. But what I would ask you is, okay, let's in this 2028 to 2035 range, is America, still the last domino to fall, or does it somehow precede everything else going down? Because we are still, for now, the reserve currency.
Correct.
What does that actually look like? If by the time America falls, does that mean every other fiat currency has already gone to near zero? Or how does that shake out?
That's a great question, Walker, and I've thought about it a lot. And Brent Johnson, the dollar milkshake theory guy, is a friend of mine, and Luke and I have talked about it as well, Luke Groman. And it's a little, it's a little hard to say. I mean, so yes, we are the reserve currency. That's a plus, but we run a much larger trade deficit than anybody else, much larger. I mean, what do we export? We export weapons and money. I mean, people really, there's not much else. Whereas other people, Russia and a lot of other places, I mean, they're exporting stuff. I mean, real valuable stuff. You know, what we're talking about here is, I mean, the dollar has a bid because it was the reserve currency. And it still is the reserve currency, but that's fading fast. We got to go into something. We'll talk about gold in here in a second. What the answer to your question has to do with, when do countries start trading based on their trade balance and their investment balance, and not just on the power they've got and their military power, like what we've got. And so the military power and the fact that we are historically the world's reserve currency have been how the dollar is valued. So, I could see us being the last currency standing, but I could also see us going sooner than some other currencies that are in countries that are much better in terms of the balance of trade. I mean, it's because relative currency valuations often really have to do with just trade. I mean, what are you exporting? What are you importing? Because that's what those cross prices are. And more importantly, the real issue with the dollar is not I mean, Brent says, well, it's a milkshake, it's better. Fine, I ignore all that shit. They're all pieces of paper. They're all fiat currencies. I mean, there's nobody in the world who's really running a sound money standard. So that really doesn't matter. What matters is the dollar cross to gold and the dollar cross to Bitcoin. I mean, and those are the two clues that tell you, I mean, if Bitcoin's at $500,000 a coin and gold's at $10,000 an ounce, well, guess what? The dollar is failing on an absolute basis. So let's kind of touch there into another area that I think is relevant, which is, we're seeing, and this is big to me, in the United States. I mean, and you have to remember, we all believe Bitcoin's a solution, and it is. It's much better than gold. But, I mean, most people aren't where we are. most people, in governments who are thinking, okay, we got to do a reset or we got to go back to sound money, the first thing that comes to their mind is gold. I mean, a perfect example. This is a really nice lady, and she's very smart, named Judy Shelton, who was nominated for the Fed. She's a sound money person, um, I think that the general view is that we've got to go. If we're going to do a reset, it would be a reset to gold. And what you're seeing out there right now is you're kind of seeing that happen subtly but consistently. And what I mean to say is that everything, all trade used to be in dollars, but you're seeing now countries trading with each other in their own currencies and then net settling in gold. And that's why the gold, what's very interesting to me is that the gold price has been very strong in spite of the fact that gold ETF purchasing has gone down. I mean, the Bitcoin ETFs have eaten gold's lunch, right? Bitcoin ETFs have gone from nothing to being substantial in size. Gold ETFs have been shrinking the whole time. Okay, you look at that and you would think to yourself, well, the price of gold should be going down, but it's not. I mean, yesterday the price of gold traded at a new all-time intraday high at 2045, 2458 or something. But and the reason for that is that other countries are using gold. They are using gold as their neutral reserve asset. They realize that having the dollar as a neutral reserve asset is a losing proposition. In other words, they're very much like the French were in '71. They can see the problem that we've got, and they're thinking, "Oh shit, I'm not hanging on to these things. I'm not buying any more Treasury bills. In fact, I'm selling Treasury bills." And China and Japan have both been net sellers of Treasury bills the last 6 months. Other countries doing the same. And most people, I think, are just saying, if I'm going to try and store value, maybe I ought to do it in gold. Sadly, and maybe some countries are doing it in Bitcoin, but I don't think at the sovereign level other than El Salvador and maybe some countries in the Middle East. I went to a Satoshi's roundtable over in the Middle East, and there's some very interesting, highly placed Middle Eastern people there who, my sense is they might have a sense that Bitcoin is digital gold, but it's still pretty early days at the sovereign level from what I can tell. Now, that's why what Lummis said and what Kennedy said and what Trump kind of said, but he didn't really understand what he was saying, that having Bitcoin as a strategic reserve, that's why that's so goddamn important. And I don't think any of them really fully understand what that means, but they've been orange pilled and they're coming to get it. And basically, as Saylor laid out in his speech at the show, I mean, if the U.S. were to go maxi on printing fiat, I mean, if the U.S. were to adopt the MicroStrategy playbook, which is to say, if they were to print fiat and use it to buy Bitcoin, that would be a very good thing for the U.S. people. It would be a very, very good thing. Now, what they probably don't realize, and this is where I think Trump, the Bitcoin with Trump, it's like a Trojan horse. It's now inside the circle, and I don't think he knows what he's got. Because if we go in that direction, that's going to accelerate the failure of the dollar. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I make it very clear. I think my kids, your kids, will be purchasing things. I think everything will be priced in Satoshis in X number of years. I don't know if it's 10 or 20 or 30, but I don't think there will be dollar prices for things. I think the dollar will ultimately fail. I think Saylor thinks that and knows that too, but I don't think he can say it because of his position. He doesn't want to. I mean, the U.S. government's the bear, and there's no point in poking the bear, especially when you're, Michael Saylor and you've got this huge Bitcoin operation that you're running. So, his view is just it's this pristine asset, and that's great. I mean, I agree with that. That's all true, but it's going to become more than that, in my view.
Well, and that's actually it's a perfect lead-in because I wanted to ask you about, okay, this Bitcoin strategic reserve that's been now floated out there by by multiple people now, and now is actually a bill, which is quite interesting. Like, well, they're gonna have to talk about that and debate it, and that just brings opens up that Overton window even more. But my thought was, okay, doesn't this actually let's say this happens, okay, let's say this Bitcoin bill is passed into law. Doesn't that actually allow the United States to, let's say, kick that can down the road a little bit more to maintain dollar hegemony, to keep themselves solvent longer than they would have normal? Because you're saying this, you think it's going to ultimately accelerate it. So, because I'm struggling on this, how does that shake
question.
out?
I listened to the Matthew Crowder, video before our talk because I know somebody asked the question of it's tricky, it's complicated. I think I come down on the side of no. I mean, I think it's good strategically for the country, but I think everything that supports Bitcoin and makes the Bitcoin dollar. I mean, look, sadly, I don't think Bill Lummis's bill's going to get any traction. I mean, I think it's a great move on her part. I'm glad she did it. I mean, it's, just like I'm glad Trump embraces Bitcoin, not even understanding it. It's all good, but in terms of actually having something happen as a result of that, I think the odds are quite low. If it did happen and they became they got on the bid for it and started buying it, it's going to push the price much higher. And you want to talk about what's going to cause the dollar to fail? It's going to be the realization. I mean, this goes back to Gresham's law, right? I mean, once people realize that, once the Bitcoin price crosses 100, 200, 300, 500,000, people are going to realize, holy shit, this is continuing to be the best performing asset in the world. How can I not hold this? And more people are going to buy it. And so, that's just a problem until eventually everyone goes, it's kind of like, and it's going to be slower than this example, but it's kind of like the example of Silicon Valley Bank. I mean, the word spread, or like a fire in a theater, the word spread, and as the word spreads and spreads and spreads, and more people realize, holy shit, this bank is bankrupt. Then one day, $100 billion of deposits. They had $49 billion of deposits withdrawn in one day, and one day later, the bank was bankrupt. And so that goes to Parker Lewis's gradually then suddenly, right? I mean, and so. There will come, in my opinion, I mean, and you've even had some people, like I say, you've even had some people kind of alluding to this. I mean, you got the Fed chairman saying this is not sustainable. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess, another model of this is the emperor's got no clothes on. The U.S. is bankrupt and we're spending way too much money. We've got an uncontrollable financial and fiscal situation. So the question really is, who's going to be the little boy that says, hey, this guy's naked? And then everyone goes, oh, yeah, you're right. I mean, another perfect example of this exact same phenomenon was many of us were saying, Biden is senile. I mean, the guy has totally fucking lost it, right? I mean, we've known this for a year or two, and they gaslit us and said, oh no, he's great, everything's fine. And then finally one day they put him up on a stage in a debate, and guess what? We all know he's senile, and therefore he's no longer running for president, and that's what's going to happen. I mean, maybe not that quickly, maybe not that dramatically, but that's the kind of mental phase shift that's going to happen. And, by being aware of it today, my view is, the whole financial saying was, he who panics first panics best. I mean, if we're going to have a panic, if we know the dollar is going to fail, well, get the fuck out now. Because I'd much rather buy Bitcoin at 70,000, a coin than at 700,000 a coin. I mean, they're both going to protect you. But, I mean, I wish I'd been Max. I wish I'd been buying it at $2 a coin, but I wasn't smart enough or aware enough to do that. And that's why I'm not a billionaire. Yeah. And he is. But, it's to me, it's just an inevitable trend. And therefore, that's why I do what I do. And I just pound the table to people to try to protect themselves, because I can just, it's pattern recognition. I can just see this pattern. I've seen it in financial things for 40 years. And this is going to go much, much, much higher. The only thing, in my opinion, Walker, that could change it would be incredible change at the government level to get more fiscally responsible. I mean, when people come to invest in my fund, sometimes they'll say, well, if they're smart, they'll say, what could go wrong? How do I lose money, Larry? What changes so that this gets fucked up? And I say, okay, it's pretty simple. And they laugh when I tell them this. I say, if suddenly the government says, all right, we're going to balance the budget, we're going to means test Social Security, we're going to raise the retirement age, we're going to close all the military bases, we're going to stop sending money overseas, and we're going to completely balance the budget so that we're no longer running a deficit and we don't have to print money, well, okay, then suddenly having sound money isn't going to be as important, and the price of Bitcoin is not going to go up as much, and the price of gold is not going to go up as much, because the dollar won't be being debased as quickly. But, as you were smiling as I said that, because we all know, what are the odds of that happening, right? I mean, they would seem to be pretty low. They seem they're either low or they're zero. But, in both cases, I mean, I know which side of the straight I want to be on, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, it's an interesting thing, because one thing Trump said a lot, and honestly, during his speech, I mean, I think he's hilarious. He's like, He knows
He's
how
a
to
lot
work.
funnier than I thought. He
Oh,
has
yeah.
some very funny lines.
I mean, he knows how to work a room. I think
He
he's
does.
a natural stand-up comic,
He
honestly.
really is. He's a
Like
little bit goofy, but and
he works it well though, and
he
it
did.
works very
Yeah.
well. One thing I did not hear though, unless I missed it, but I didn't hear him talk at all about shrinking the size of the government.
No.
I didn't hear him say anything. And that would have been the venue to do it. You're
Yes.
talking to a room full of people who predominantly, if you ask them if the government should be bigger, smaller, or the same size, they'd say smaller and as small as humanly possible, or
Right.
some would say non-existent, right?
Right.
But I didn't hear anything about that.
No.
And so maybe another way to look at this is, there's obviously a massive difference between someone like Trump and someone like Kamala, or whoever perhaps ends up being the actual candidate. Maybe it is going to be her. But are they both just going to keep printing money because nothing stops this train?
I think that's right. I mean, I think Trump is he's pretty narcissistic, and I think he's pretty much driven by his ego. I think he'd be obviously be a better choice than Kamala, because at least he's competitive, and I think he would think of America first, vis-a-vis China and other places. But I don't think anyone is thinking, anyone in these government roles, including Trump, is thinking smaller government, more restraint, cutting back. And as Trump has always said, he's the master of debt. I mean, he was, Mr. Leverage, and we know he wants lower interest rates. And so I don't think Trump at any kind of fundamental level really understands that the money is broken and that sound money is the solution. I mean, which is not to say, though, that he couldn't get advisors that wouldn't educate him on that. I mean, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't think, he's not a socialist, and he's going to close the borders. And I mean, a lot of his policies make a ton of sense. So, he's clearly, in my view, the better choice of, him versus Kamala. But to be honest with you, listening to them all carefully, the only one I can get any bit excited about is RFK Jr. because, I think he does deeply understand the problem. He does deeply understand how broken the society is, and he does want to address the fundamental issue. I mean, part of what's caused all this debt, we haven't talked much about this, is just kind of the warfare state, the military-industrial complex. I mean, we pissed away $6 or $7 trillion in the Middle East, trying to secure oil and just all kinds of other stupid things. And, we've got, veterans I see in the airports with limbs blown off from IEDs. And I mean, it's fucking tragic, not to mention all the foreigners we killed, many of whom were innocent. So, sadly, I mean, this is another piece of the centralization. I mean, so my view, Walker's, in 46, we hit peak centralization, when, World War II, because of Hitler's misbehavior, we slaughtered 50 million people, 50, 60 million people in World War II. And that was peak centralization. And now, thank God for technology. Thank God for, Shockley and the development of the microchip, and then, Fairchild and Intel and everything that came after it, because what that has done is it's created the internet, and the internet is the biggest, most powerful decentralizing force in the universe, because now guys like you can be equal to Walter Cronkite, what he used to be. I mean, we got our news from 3 sources when I was a kid, and it was all the news that the government wanted to let out. And of course, we all now know the government lies about just about everything. And the only way to get the truth is to find it from real truth tellers on the web. And this is why, Rogan and Tucker and a ton of other people have gotten a lot of attention, because, they represent an alternative to what we know are lies. And so this decentralization, in my view, is going to make your life and your son's life just a whole lot better, because it's long overdue, because these big centralized organizations are so corrupt and have just gotten so broken and just don't work for us. I mean, I'm writing about this in my book. I mean, Janet Yellen getting $7 million in speaking fees. I mean, come on, that's just a fucking bribe.
Insane.
And it's just one of many instances. I mean, another one that I just dug up, I'd forgotten about this. You probably don't remember it. I don't know if you were paying attention at the time, but in 2008, when the GFC happened, they created this thing called TALF, which is Troubled Asset Lending Facility. What it allowed people to do was to borrow money from the government. So Christy Mack, who was the wife of the chairman of Morgan Stanley and another Morgan Stanley executive's wife, they borrowed $220 million from the federal government non-recourse and used it to buy assets. Okay? And so Walker, it was a no lose for them. If those assets had gone south, they didn't know a dime. And if those assets went up in value, which of course they did, they made millions and millions of dollars, right? Yeah, this is just the wife of the chairman of Morgan Stanley was allowed to do this. I mean, it's just one of thousands of examples. I mean, when Paulson went to Washington, D.C. to become Treasury Secretary for Bush, he had a $700 million sale of his Goldman Sachs stock, and he had to pay no tax on it because they wrote a rule that allowed you to do that when you were going into government service. And that's why, Jamie Dimon has been rumored to maybe to go into government service, and it's in large part because he could take his $1 billion of JP Morgan stock and be able to dispose of it tax-free. This is the way the system is set up. It's just so fucking broken. It's just disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting,
I did not know about the Morgan Stanley
Isn't that amazing?
Thing.
Yeah,
that's
Matt
I'm gonna have to dig into
wrote
that.
about it. You can Google it. In fact, I encourage your listeners to Google it. Google The Real Housewives of Wall Street, Matt Taibbi. It's free. It's not behind a paywall. And read that story. It'll blow your mind. It's just like what the fuck,
Like how is it possible that this was allowed to happen? Well, that's the thing that the longer your eyes are open, you start to realize that these insane things that you're like, well, no, that can't possibly be true. It's like, oh no, it's true, and it's happening far more frequently than you understand.
Oh, absolutely,
far more.
And that's why I'm writing the book. I've got 40 years of watching this shit, and it's just like, it's just piling up, and I'm just so disgusted. They blew away Kennedy. The CIA blew away Kennedy because Dulles, was pissed off that he fired him after the Bay of Pigs, where he tried to bag him there. There's just so many. The more you, it's just like going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. You want to go down the government corruption rabbit hole? Holy fucking shit! You start listening to Whitney Webb. Oh my God, it's unbelievable. What our government has done in our name, and I've been around to see it. Here's a perfect example. Everyone talks about how bad World War II was, how many people were killed, all this stuff. You realize that in Vietnam, Walker, we killed 3 million Vietnamese citizens. And most of them were just fucking rice farmers. Okay, so think about it. Our federal government killed 3 million Vietnamese. Those were lives. Those were actual human lives, right? And I remember very clearly because I was a teenager. Nixon was like, he's trying to win the election, and he decided, we're going to carpet bomb North Vietnam with B-52s. What the fuck? What the fuck? That was our government doing that. And, why did that happen? Well, the guys making the B-52s and the bombs, they made a lot of money. Right? And it's just sick. And, we got to fix it. These people cannot fail fast enough. And, therefore the podcast, therefore the book, therefore the movement, all of it. I'm fed up. And, to me, it's a mission. It's absolutely a mission to spread the word and, get people pissed off so that, we're marching on the Eccles building down in D.C., to end the goddamn Federal Reserve. It's beyond the pale. And by the way, these people know that what they're doing is wrong. They absolutely know it. They know that what they're doing is wrong, but they can get away with it because nobody's calling them on it. That's the beauty of the internet, right? And that's the beauty of books, and that's the beauty of passing knowledge around. All we got to do, we outnumber them enormously. The 1%, they're literally 1%. The other 99%, we in terms of numbers, we got them beat, hands down. Now, they got their hands on all the levers of control, but we're taking that away too because, they say, well, we can tax you, we can grab your Bitcoin, we can do that. Oh yeah? Mullah on the Bay, you motherfuckers. I've got 12 words. You can't take my money, seriously. It's like, that's the beauty of this system. We finally got a weapon that allows us to actually destroy their system, by the way, it needs to be destroyed. It really does. So you wanted to rant. It was like, wind me up, man. You got me going.
There we go. Well, no, and you can keep winding it. Absolutely.
No, I better back it off, or I'm going to see some 3-letter agencies at my door.
We're all on lists already. Let's be honest. That's a fact. That's a fact. I think we can all agree the fiat system is absolutely fucked. But thankfully we have Bitcoin. But that Bitcoin doesn't do us any good if we don't keep it safe, if we don't take self-custody. So go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker for 5% off the fully open source Bitcoin only Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. Then get your Bitcoin the hell off that exchange. What are they doing on there anyway? And take them into your own self-custody. The Bitbox O2 is easy as hell to use, whether you are brand new to Bitcoin, it's your very first hardware wallet, or you're a seasoned psychopath. It is Bitcoin only, and again, it is fully open source. You can head to their GitHub and verify that for yourself. There's no need to trust me or to trust Bitbox. When you go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker, not only do you get 5% off an awesome piece of open source Bitcoin hardware, but you also help support this fucking podcast. So seriously, thank you. Well, there's a lot to touch on there. Maybe one of the things is just talking about, because you mentioned Kennedy and we were talking about RFK earlier. You know, one of the things I heard RFK bring up in a slightly smaller setting was he brought up Executive Order 11110. Did I say 4 ones and a zero?
Yeah, the
silver one, which I'd never heard a politician bring up before. And I'd been researching it for a while because of Carla's dad, who escaped communism and pays attention to government overreach, had told me, why don't you look this up? And started going down that rabbit hole a bit and seeing that, a lot of conspiracy theorists, quote, think that maybe that's also one of the reasons that, Kennedy needed to go, because you can't take power away from the Fed and give it to the Treasury. But I was curious if you had any thoughts on that. But then I'll stop there for a second and just, do you think that's something that there is ever the possibility of getting floated again, taking away some of the power of the Fed to have because they are a cartel, right? They have, it's a private bank cartel. Yes, I know that they're, quote, public and private, but we all know that that's BS, right? Right. So is there any situation in which the Fed ends up having some of their power taken away? It doesn't seem that Trump's keen on that. Kamala, I don't think even knows what's going on there. Maybe Kennedy would. Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a fabulous question. I mean, so look, the Fed was established by Congress. The Fed could be abolished by Congress. I mean, Ron Paul or, anyone could introduce a bill and say, we're going to shut the Federal Reserve down. And again, in the book I'm writing, I talk about that as one of the solutions. I mean, literally, we should just close the Federal Reserve. I mean, there should be no Federal Reserve. And banks, the Federal Reserve was established to be a cartel for the banks and to provide banks with a backstop. We should take it away. And so basically, if a bank wants to do fractional reserve lending, get out over their skis and blow up, well, the depositors should lose all their money. And so, banks should be responsible. They should balance deposits against, demand for loans. But back to the Kennedy thing, I'll touch on that briefly. I think that silver thing was a piece of it, but I've read it. I've read more than you could possibly read about the Kennedy thing, and I've read some books that weren't even published that were kind of pretty dark web sort of stuff. And of course, I know the government did it. And there were a multitude of reasons. The silver thing was clearly a piece of it. I think the bigger, and they really tried to justify themselves in lots of ways. If you read this stuff carefully, I think the biggest piece was the military-industrial complex wanted to have a nice war in Vietnam, and he didn't want it. He didn't want that. He was going to try and wind it down. So to me, that was the biggest issue. But they did other things. There were related issues. As you know, Kennedy was a philanderer. It was one of his weaknesses, and he had an affair with a Russian agent unknowingly. And so I think one of the ways they justified it, here are men talking about killing the president of the United States, and I think in their minds, one of the ways I'm sure they justified it was they said, well, look, this guy's a national threat because look at him, he's screwing anything that moves, and he had an affair with a Russian agent. So that was another reason behind why Kennedy got killed. It's I don't know. I kind of got off on a tangent there, but what was the rest of your question on that?
I guess just, is there anything that ends up taking away the Federal Reserve's power?
Back to the Fed. Yeah. Well, look, what will ultimately take away the Fed's power is hyperinflation. Because I think, and sadly, unless we get a lot smarter, and maybe we will, maybe I think if you got an RFK in there and you got a Judy Shelton on the board of the Federal Reserve and you got, guys like me and other, sound money people, James Grant and others, talking to the right people, we could talk about how to fairly do a monetary reset to go back to a sound money, solution. But honestly, I don't see any, I don't see a big movement for that now. And I think inflation is going to have to get a lot worse before that happens, but it could happen. I think the more likely case, sadly, is, inflation and then big inflation and then ultimately hyperinflation. And at that point in time, it's pretty easy. If we have hyperinflation, it's pretty easy to know how that happened. And that was the Federal Reserve. And at that point in time, I think, a lot of questions are going to get thrown on the table. And, there's going to be a batch of politicians who just say, gosh, you ruined the currency. You can't create another fiat currency. We need to have a currency that's tied to gold or Bitcoin or both or some basket of commodities. I think the obvious and correct solution will be Bitcoin. I think that's what the market will choose. And maybe the market will be, the decider in the end. It won't even be a political decision. I mean, everyone will just be transacting in Bitcoin. I mean, one of the things I hope for in terms of this transition is I don't hope for hyperinflation because it'll be horrible for everybody. But, what I hope for is if Bitcoin does extremely well, more and more people will transition to it and will just kind of shrink and the dollar will just kind of fade away. And that, it will become worth much less in Bitcoin terms and everyone will migrate to Bitcoin. And I can see a way out of this without hyperinflation. It's more just kind of the dollar. People just aren't transacting in it anymore. I mean, but we're a long way from that. I mean, as you know, the principal use case for Bitcoin today is store of value, and we've got to get to medium of exchange. I mean, I was speaking to Jeff Booth the other day, and he said he disagreed with Saylor. I mean, so Saylor is pushing store of value, and he doesn't want to push medium of exchange because he doesn't want to poke the bear, and I get that. That's smart. Booth disagrees with him and told me so, and said, and maybe even writing a book on this topic, and said, look, we got to get medium of exchange. And let me tell you why. If we just go store of value, they're going to 6102 us, just like they did with gold. We've got to get this into the fabric of the system. And I said, that's great, Jeff. I agree with you. God damn it, let's get this lightning shit to work. Because, if you were to ask me, what are you frustrated about with respect to Bitcoin? I have to say one of the things I'm a little bit frustrated about. I would like to have thought, my experience, and maybe I'm not the best guy to know, but I'm a typical older boomer. My experience with Lightning, it hasn't been as seamless and as easy to use and as good as I would have hoped. Now, I recall back to the days of the early internet in 93 and 4, when I had to take a phone and put it into a modem and listen to a deet 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 deet, and it was 1200 baud and it was a green screen. So, maybe that's kind of where we are on Lightning, and maybe in 5 years Lightning is going to be a thing of beauty. But from what I can see today, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, I'm not trying to criticize Lightning people, we got a little ways to go there, right?
Yeah, I think we definitely have a ways to go in terms of non-custodial Lightning.
Right.
Because, custodial Lightning, there are a lot of wallets now that have, big fat channels open with each other.
Okay.
I think Bitfinex provides something like, don't quote me exactly, they've got somewhere around like maybe it's a third, or it might even be, it's either a third or a half of the liquidity on the entire network. So they've got massive channels open. Some other,
are you aware of people making $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 Lightning transactions without a problem?
I am not. Yeah, see,
that's the problem. I mean, I'll give you an experience I had. I gave Sam and Natalie a wedding gift in Nashville, and it wasn't trivial. I'm not gonna say how big it was, but it wasn't trivial. And and I was using Moon, and I know people say, "Oh, that's old technology, stupid you using Moon." Well, okay, fine. That was all I knew how to do, and that is where my money is. And it took an hour for it to settle.
What I would say about Moon is that, and I'm not the most technical, obviously, but I know that Moon does these atomic swaps. So a lot of people will say, well, Moon's not actually using lightning.
Fair enough.
But to your point again, I think that of course this still needs to improve and needs to be able to scale more, but also scale more in different layers. That's why I think it's great that there's things like Fediment, which
Yes.
are, again, everything has trade-offs, right? Lightning has trade-offs.
Right.
Bitcoin base layer is for when you want to send money in an uncensorable way without any sort of third party needing to be involved in any way.
Right.
As you go down the chain of layers, you are making trade-offs. That's how the whole thing
Correct.
works, right? And that's why you
Right.
don't try to do everything on the base layer, because if you try to do everything in the base layer, you have to make those trade-offs on the base
Right.
layer, which is then you get a Solana or an Ethereum or whatever it may be. We know we don't want those trade-offs in the base layer because we want a sound base layer. We want a truly
Correct.
sound money as the base. But
Correct.
I think, I always get inspired going to these conferences because I see the people that are building this stuff. Callie, an incredible developer, he's building. He wrote the protocol for Cashew, which is Chami and eCash,
Right.
which again has trade-offs. You've got to trust a custodian to a mint, but the other
Right.
side of the trade-off is you get near perfect privacy, and it's faster than Lightning. So
Wow.
there's trade-offs all the way down. And I think that these experiences are going to improve massively. I think that also things like Nostr, where you're adding basically a social layer
Yes.
to that Lightning network, is really powerful.
Completely
because then
agree.
you just look up somebody who I just look up Larry. I need to send you some money. Okay, great. You're creating a Venmo-like experience for people, except better. Which is fantastic. And so I have a lot of hope for that. But
I
of
do
course,
too. I
still
do too.
early
I'm
days.
completely, I'm long-term very bullish on it. I just, like everything. I mean, you got a long runway. You're younger than I am.
Fair.
Come on, guys, let's go.
No.
Speed this shit up now.
Absolutely. And I think that, I think we're also going to see, as more attention comes to this, and more, honestly, more investment in projects that are trying to build solutions
Right.
on Bitcoin, on
Absolutely.
Lightning, on layer
No,
threes.
I mean the more
that accelerates too.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the more. I mean, look, it's better today than it was 2 years ago. It's better than 4 years ago. I mean, so it's all going in the right direction. Don't get me wrong. I just, we all want it to go faster, and it will.
Amen. And it's only, I think, also by being honest about what the shortfalls are right now that we see meaningful change. Because if we all say, sometimes there's this tendency to say no, everything's perfect, it works great. It's like, this is why I appreciated, just on a slightly different note, but Matt Corallo, who gave his presentation right before Trump, which was awesome that they gave him that slot, because I think he's consistently one of the most realistic yet optimistic people out there in terms of talking about, look, guys, mining centralization is a problem. Like, we should talk about this. We can't just pretend it doesn't exist. And so I think we need to continue having conversations where we say the uncomfortable truths that maybe we don't want to, because we don't want to be fudding Bitcoin or fudding Lightning or fudding eCash or whatever, but we got to have those conversations, and it's good to have them publicly.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, look, I mean, we had the block size wars. We got, we will get through all of these challenges. I have no doubt about that. Absolutely not. I'm extremely bullish.
So another thing, just changing gears a little bit, but so we've talked a lot about the U.S. and obviously the U.S. has its fair share of problems from a monetary perspective, but those problems ripple out as well, right? And whether that be because we have a big ass military that can stomp its feet, or because we have our biggest export is those dollars, the rest of the world feels the brunt of that as well.
Absolutely.
And you see countries like El Salvador, and I think you were recently down there this year. Is that right? Yeah. Was that your first time there?
It was. I went for the halving party that Big
That's
Sean
awesome.
threw. It was great. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
That's awesome. But so Bukele took a very kind of finger to the IMF approach. The IMF, which is ultimately a U.S. institution at the end of the day, and they have been steadily stacking Bitcoin. They had the Bitcoin legal tender law, obviously. I think that a lot of people saw that happening and thought, oh, other countries are going to be picking up this baton really rapidly. And we haven't seen that as much. I think now maybe now that the U.S. is more publicly getting pro Bitcoin, let's say at least some factions of the United States government are, maybe we see that shift. But I'm wondering if you see, okay, so again, to bring it back to the U.S., we see the United States adopt a Bitcoin strategic reserve.
Right.
That obviously in the short term, I would say strengthens the dollar's position. I assume you've made a case for that in the long term. it is that Trojan horse that accelerates the decline of the dollar because
Correct.
Bitcoin is repricing it all. But do you think you start to see other large nation states, follow the lead of the U.S.? If the U.S. kind of gives it its stamp of approval, do you start to see that domino effect happen really rapidly? Or do they kind of say, maybe this is the U.S. trying to pull one of their other tricks on us? You know what I mean?
I'm not sure they'd conclude that. Well, first of all, I'm not really sure. It's a little bit of a hypothetical in the sense that the U.S. really starting to do it because in spite of all this political rhetoric, I think the actual action on it, like I don't think Lummis's bill is going to get traction. I don't think Kennedy's going to win. He would buy it, but and I don't think Trump is going to buy it. I think he's just going to not sell it because he doesn't want China to get ahead of us. But and by the way, to the degree that other countries that we consider to be strategic competitors, and the biggest ones I would obviously name in the world would be China and Russia. My sense is if they're seeing it and looking, my sense is they might be, probably not China, but certainly Russia, that they might be mining it on their own. I mean, look, I mean, in private conversation with Jason Lowery, my partner and I, we've learned that within the United States government, the CIA, the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, they get it. They actually get how important this shit is. I mean, they understand it. The power projection of having the Bitcoin, which probably means that the same agencies in China and Russia get it too. And my sense is, you don't, if you, it's like gold. If you want to buy it, you don't signal that you want to buy it. Why, you only have to pay more for it. So you keep your mouth shut and you just, you look at all the hash that's coming out of Russia. My sense is that some of that might be government hash. I also think that the Gulf states get it. I really do. What I saw at Satoshi's Roundtable, what I've heard, what we've seen, I have the sense that there are probably, whether it's the UAE or the Saudis or who knows, but I have a sense that part of the GCC, some number of members of the GCC Council gets it, and they're starting to stack this pristine asset. I think that's true. You might see some other smaller countries doing it. I mean, I don't know, maybe Argentina could do it eventually, maybe Brazil could do it, maybe Latvia. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if some other countries pick up on it, but it'll start with the smaller countries first, I would imagine. And the real winning strategy, as Saylor points out, is a country that can issue fiat and buy Bitcoin. I mean, good God, what a deal! It's
what a trade.
Saylor
right?
is really just doing the Hugo Stinnes strategy of, he's issuing claims in something that he knows isn't going to go down in value, and he's buying the thing that he knows is going to go up in value. I mean, it's just like a turn the crank kind of money machine, which is why MicroStrategy is such a fabulous stock. My fund owns it, and I own it personally, and so on and so forth. I mean, it really is brilliant. So, I would imagine that other countries, other smart countries, will pick up on it. But, the whole EU, I mean, no, they're all stupid as shit. I mean, they're not going to get it. I mean, I don't think you're going to see anybody there pick up on it anytime soon. That's kind of my take.
I would definitely agree on the EU side of things. I think they've shown in many ways more outright hostility than even China or Russia, because even though China, I mean, how many times has China banned Bitcoin now?
Right.
But there's still hash coming out of there.
Right.
And the government knows what's like. We know that the Chinese government does a great job of surveilling their people.
Right.
So
they
it's
must
not
know
that they're
where it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe it's government hash. We don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's yeah. So it's going to be an interesting couple of years here. I mean, things are happening extremely quickly. And just as an aside, you didn't ask about it, but I'll just shift gears. I mean,
Please
I think
do.
another accelerant to all of this is I think the U.S. stock market is an enormous bubble. I mean, I've been an investment manager for my whole career, and I've seen two very big bubbles in my life: the dot-com bubble in 2000 and the housing bubble in 2008. And I got to tell you, this one's is big or bigger than both of those. It's the everything bubble. It's driven by low interest rates and ZERP, and I personally believe that this stock market could fall 70 or 80%. And that's actually a tail risk event that I would ask everybody to kind of consider, and I'm going to talk about this in the book as well. And that is the true risk of outright deflation, like we had in the 20s and 30s. I mean, and look, the government will try to address it by printing money, and we know they will. They did the same in the 20s and 30s. But what happens if it overwhelms them? What happens if it's so much that they can't print enough to stop it? Or printing enough to stop it leads to hyperinflation. And so, that's the case for holding forms of sound money. And in that case, we don't necessarily get Bitcoin hyperization, but what we do get is we'd actually get a falling and collapsing price structure. I mean, so in the 30s, which was the last case and really the only case of worldwide deflation, major deflation, the prices of houses fell 70% from 29 to 33, 70%. So everyone who's storing value in their house, keep that in mind, right? And how did you do well in the 30s? You had cash, and gold was cash, right, and cash was cash, and so I still think gold and Bitcoin will be their cash, their money that the government can't print. So it's it's gonna be really, really hairy, Walker, because you've got with this big a bubble and this much debt, and in a normal cycle you would have just a massive, you've borrowed, debt is consuming in advance of production, and when debt collapses, the whole price structure just collapses. And so this is the argument for food stores and cash and just being prepared. I don't think most people understand that the prices of these things could go down. Of a lot of things could go down. These people who are buying 10 and 20 and $50 million mansions. That happened in Newport, Rhode Island in the 20s as well. And they're now all museums because nobody could afford to maintain them on a go-forward basis. And so I would just ask people to study history and understand what a true deflationary collapse a la 1929 looks like, and therefore to further understand that given the kind of bubble conditions we've got, that kind of a thing could occur. And we know that the government would print like absolute crazy, but that printing like absolute crazy would lead to hyperinflation. So you're kind of trapped between these two extremes, these two terrible monetary extremes, right? One is just a complete collapse where nobody has any money and all the debt's worthless, and the price of everything falls and you're scrambling for liquidity. And then the other is the government says, okay, no, don't worry about it. We're going to give you the liquidity. We're going to send you UBI. We're going to send you checks. We're going to print $1 gazillion and we're going to send it out so that everything keeps functioning. But everyone goes, hang on a second, what's this money really worth? And yeah, thank you, government, for sending me the money, but how am I going to pay for my $20 gallon of gas? You didn't send me enough. It's
all roads lead to nothing stops this train, basically.
Yes, I guess that's right. And to be honest with you, I'm just as scared about it as anybody else. I think I've got the right assets, and I pray that we make it through it with not a war and not a lot of people dying and the minimal level of suffering. And that's why I think what all these people have done is just unbelievably irresponsible to put us in this position. But there is a way back from it with good leadership. We could do a monetary transition, from unsound money to sound money, and that's kind of what Roosevelt did. Roosevelt grabbing the gold was wrong and evil and illegal, but it actually did reset the system. And in 34, the market rallied like crazy because he had, basically, what's happening here is all these paper currencies are just overvalued. They just are. And therefore the price, if you look around the world, the price of everything is they're all just fake prices. And so we need to get back to what would quote unquote be real prices. And the only way to determine what the real price of something would be is to measure it with a yardstick that doesn't move all the time, and that would be a fixed, a currency that's sound or sounder. And of course, almost anything is sounder than the dollar. And obviously Bitcoin and gold are the two, natural choices. Obviously, I prefer Bitcoin, but I'm just, either. Gold would certainly be better. The problem is, as gold's been captured and all the other stuff. And they would. They would continue to manipulate it the way they have, and it's harder to do that with Bitcoin. But I don't know, man. It's gonna be a mess. These fourth turnings are no fun, but on the other side of it, which I hope isn't that far out, I would prefer to get it over with, take the pain, get to the other side, and then I think it's really going to be good. I mean, we're gonna have a very, very healthy and strong society, and the promise of I mean, all the technology that we've developed in the last 40 years, it's fantastic. It really is. We should all be working 20-hour work weeks. I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic, and we're not, because all the value has been siphoned off by the people at the top.
Amen to that. I was just thinking, because you were talking about just technology here, and the fact that you're right. There is obviously, we have developed so many incredible things. And even just recently, that pace of technological development is also accelerating.
Right, AI.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And that's, as Jeff Booth has talked about many, many times, technology being a naturally deflationary force.
Absolutely.
And I have to wonder how much technology has allowed governments and central banks around the world to paper over the actual amount of debasement that has occurred. Because, things, we do keep getting more efficient. Assembly lines are incredible now, automated, all the robotics that we have in play, but things are still getting more expensive and more expensive. So when you're looking at, okay, how much are they really stealing from us? You don't just take it down to the baseline. You've got to take it below the baseline.
This is great stuff. And again, the book talks about this. I mean, so, and what it does, what all the money printing does is, I mean, it helps by suppressing the inflation. The productivity helps by, we should be seeing lower prices and everything. We're not. They're actually going up, and they're stealing the difference between how much they're going up and what they should be on the going down thing. The other thing that happens is with the money printing is it doesn't necessarily always go into the consumer products. It tends to sometimes goes into the assets. And this is what's created the quintillionaires. And this is actually the same thing happened in the 1920s, where one of the reasons why the Fed was so loose and why they let the 1929 stock bubble get to where it got to was because they didn't have consumer goods inflation. The reason they did, but they didn't look like they did, because they had so much productivity improvement happening that that they were therefore running a low inflation number. But really their inflation number was, in my view, the best measure of the inflation number is just money supply growth. I mean, if you really look at money supply growth, that's your inflation number, right? Forget what the CPI says. That's cooked. And so, I mean, because you're getting prices are going down because of the deflation that naturally is present as a result of better technology. And yet, that may hold prices flat when, they're not printing too much. So they print too much, then prices really go up. So you're right. There's an even wider gap in there than is naturally reported. And it's funny to me, Walker, because I talk to a lot of people, sophisticated people in the financial business, TradFi people, et cetera. And, and I'm trying to counter this in my book. I mean, the traditional view is, inflation's just natural. And in fact, you got to have inflation. I mean, the Fed has kind of normalized it. In 1977, that's when they changed the rules at the Fed. And they said, you got two mandates. Before that, it was just kind of a broad mandate. And, it said full employment and price stability. Okay. So to my way of saying it, price stability is zero inflation, right? That's price stability. Stable is zero. But, if you read all the Fed papers, and I've done it and doing research for the book, I've done it. What you find out is that, they somehow managed to kind of sneak it in there to where 2% inflation a year is price stability, which I don't get that. That's not price stability to me.
No,
that means in 10 years you've stolen 20% of my money, And I guess, I think the reason they've done that is just that it gives them power and it allows them to continue their game. And that's kind of the largest number they figured they could get away with. But, I think what they're going to do probably, and I've seen some of them have tried to do this. Actually, Krugman had some stuff on this. Maybe 2's a little too low. Maybe we need to be at 3 or 4. And that's just that's the
Paul
nature of your game.
Was floating it out there. You could see he's testing the waters.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because I think that, to your point, that you talk with a lot of very sophisticated people who've done very well for themselves.
Sure.
Who may still have been kind of, not necessarily through any fault of their own, but just kind of brainwashed by this idea that, well, inflation's just there.
Yes.
or even worse, maybe it's just the animal spirits of the market,
Right. Well, and you need those. That's
right. And
Keynes's whole argument. You need those to keep the market healthy, which is bullshit. But go on.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just insane to me. And the other thing that I think that there's this disassociation between asset inflation and consumer goods inflation.
Correct.
And we know that, I mean, the Cantillon or Cantillon, however you want to pronounce it,
Yeah.
effect is telling us that, okay, when new money enters the system, it does not distribute evenly.
Of course not.
And we also know that monetary policy affects consumer good price inflation with a lag. And that was actually another thing that it jumped out at me from Trump's speech is he said, we had effectively no inflation during my administration, like none. And I'm just thinking, well, that's a lie.
Yeah.
Because you had a massive amount of monetary inflation. Now, what did it go to first? It went to the assets. You look at home prices during that time.
Yeah.
You look at the stock market, which, bounced back so violently
Almost
upwards.
vertically.
I mean, insane.
Yeah.
And okay, people don't tend to think of asset inflation as a bad thing. Because it's like, hey, if I'm holding assets, I'm getting rich. I'm not about to. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. I'm not complaining.
Yeah, I mean,
but it is inflation,
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And we've talked a lot about why. I had a lot of good conversations at the show about why wealthy people don't understand the need for Bitcoin, and we all kind of concluded they don't feel the pain. The system is working for them. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I know. They own Google. They've owned all those stocks. They've owned the Mag 7. They've owned Nvidia. And it's working for them, man. It's all good. Well, why are you guys messing around with this money? What are you talking about? Everything's good here. And okay, fine. Let's see how good it is in 5 or 10 years, because the tide has definitely shifted here. I mean, they lived in 40 years of deflationary world, from Volcker in 80 to the peak deflation when the 10-year hit 50 basis points in March of 2020. And that tide has turned, and we now are in inflationary world, and it's going to get worse. It's been bad. It went from 2% to 9%. They brought it back down into the threes. These are all cooked numbers anyway, but the general trend holds true. And my guess is the threes is going to be about the low of this cycle, and then the next one's going to start. We're going to go up to 12 or 15 on the next run up, and because they just it's the nature of the beast. I mean, it's Lynn's point, and it's the it's the debt structure that requires the underlying money to pay the interest. And so if they don't create additional money, the whole thing's going to collapse. I mean, I've long said the Fed is like a guy driving a clown car on an icy road. One side's deflation, one guardrail's, the other one's inflation, and they're going to break through one of them eventually, and it's going to be a mess. It's going to be a real mess.
Well, I would like to actually, just because you have this incredible amount of firsthand experience, and it sounds like that's a lot of what's going into your book.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit, and just kind of what kind of book you're trying to write, and really what kind of story you're trying to tell to get people to wake up, because for someone who has been trying to get people to wake up for a long time, I can imagine that's frustrating.
We all are. Yeah, sometimes you feel like you're just yelling in the wind, huh?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, usually what happens with people, they tend to respond to pain, and I think most people in this country are feeling pain of inflation. I mean, it's hard. You'd be hard pressed to find anyone who says, "Oh yeah, these prices are fine," right? I mean, every American in the last 3 years, in my opinion, has had some price shock where you just like, what the fuck? I mean, it's just stunning, right? My car insurance goes up 40% or whatever it might be. So everyone knows that there's a pain with inflation. But I think sadly, because of the lack of education, lack of focusing on it, the fact that inflation wasn't a problem for so many years, most people don't really understand how we get inflation, why we get inflation, what it all means. And so, I'll tell you the title of my book is, What Happened to America, Why It Is Broken, and How Sound Money Can Fix It. Fix the money, fix the world. And so the mission of the book is to present the case to a broad audience, from the tippy top, financial guys, all the way down to a guy sweeping a broom as a janitor, or working a very, blue collar job, the heartbeat, the soul of America, the people who make shit work. And so they could read this book and say, oh my God, I get it. I'm being fucked, and here's why. Here's how they're doing it. I mean, I thought it was a red-blue issue. I thought it was a this. I thought it was no. This is really the core issue. This is what we got to, if we want to truly drain the swamp. I mean, all the people who voted for Trump, rightfully because they were very pissed off that the country's in a mess. I want to refine. I want to get them to refine their view on why it really is a mess, and that it's the broken money that's creating the mess. And I'm going to give them so many examples of the corruption and the bullshit around the broken money. And I'm going to give them examples of how in the past it wasn't broken and it worked better. That, hopefully they're going to come out of the book and they're going to want to grab a pitchfork and a torch and go marching on the Eccles building down in Washington, D.C., and say, we want to string up Jay Powell. I mean, God damn it. I mean, that's the fundamental problem. I mean, we've got to, and by the way, there's a proposal in here, right? I mean, I write a chapter on what's the solution. I'm not going to give it all away now, but there are solutions to all this. And, and so there's a proposal in here. Hey, we do these things, we're going to fix this shit. And so I want to try and get everybody in the country on board with this message and understanding that this is the fundamental issue. And I don't know if I'm capable of doing that, Walker. But I do feel like, if not me, then who? Because I've been aware of this shit for 40 years. I've been in this business for 40 years, and I fully understand it very clearly. I know where the bones are buried. As I've told you about some stories we were talking beforehand about, we talked earlier about the Real Housewives of Wall Street. I mean, I got a lot of stories like that, and I think that if the people read this book, and what they'll realize is this is a recurring pattern. And, until we fix it, it's not going to get better. And so, we've got to vote for and protest and make noise and write articles and orange pill our friends and all the above, because all of those things increase the odds that we will fix it. I mean, and speaking to Jeff, Booth, a couple of weeks ago, I mean, he said, Larry, if we could get everybody to use Bitcoin, this thing would collapse instantly. And he's right. But, we're a long way from that point, right? So the book is my contribution to trying to get everyone to understand what's going on, and then to be pissed off, and then to choose to opt out of the system like you and I have, and to fight for a fairer system. So that's going to be the message.
I love it, and I can't wait to read it. And one thing you said that just really jumped out at me is, getting people to realize that it's not a red-blue thing.
Oh,
because people don't seem to understand that it's like it's my team against your team, my color against your color. That's all a distraction game.
Absolutely, that's a complete Hegelian dialect where they're just trying to get you to fight with each other so you don't focus on them. No, I'll tell you who it is. It's the 99% against the 1%, right? I mean, that's really the issue. I mean, we got to grab the power back that we should rightly have, which is to have a sound monetary system. And that got stolen from us in 1913 when the Federal Reserve was created. That's what we've got to do. And so, it's not red-blue. It's all of us against the elites who are running a system where the game board is tilted in their favor heavily. That's the problem. I mean, it's so clear.
It's so sad too, because you look at, 1913 when the Federal Reserve was established, and you just look at the basically nonstop wars that we've had since then, going back to the military industrial complex. And what was it? Was it the McFadden Act that renewed the Federal Reserve's charter in perpetuity? I think it was the McFadden Act, right?
I don't recall that one specifically. I've heard of that, but
they've got a charter indefinitely, which is just insane. It's insane that there's no expiration date on that.
I gotta look that one up.
Yeah. I believe it's McFadden Act, and I want to say it was 28 or 32, somewhere in there. Don't quote me on that, but it's just insane that we've got this system in place where they are able to basically have the carte blanche to do whatever they want.
Yes.
The whole world hangs on the words of one guy, Jerome Powell right now, but whoever it was throughout history. Hangs on the words of one guy to see what kind of hints he gives. They used to have the briefcase, or how thick is his briefcase? This is insane.
It's insane.
It's like some witchcraft or something.
To the words of my book, our grandkids are going to look back at this like, like we look back at bloodletting, right? I mean, they were draining blood to help people medically, in the Middle Ages, and I mean it was barbaric and it was absurd. And our kids, grandkids will look back at this and they'll have the same reaction. Hang on a second. Everyone knows free markets are what provide prosperity, and you let the market for money, you let that be set by 12 guys who could rig it in their favor. What the fuck were you doing? That was insane. I mean, in my lifetime, I mean, we've had 0% interest rates, we've had 20% interest rates. The 20% interest rates almost bankrupted my father's business. I mean, really close. It was very stressful in our family at that time. I remember it very well. And then we've had 0% interest rates, which totally hammered all the savers. I mean, so, and I know people like this. I mean, my in-laws fall in this bucket. You save your entire life. You've got some number, I don't know, it's 200,000 or a million, whatever it is, your life savings. You're retired, and you put it, you used to be able to, before ZERP, you used to be able to put it in a bank CD and earn 5 or 6%. And that helped supplement your Social Security. And if you lived frugally and your house was paid for, you're okay. Well, when ZERP came along, all those people, their income went to zero. Their interest income went to zero. Did the Federal Reserve care? No, they didn't give a shit. They wanted to save Wall Street and they wanted to get the economy going again. And tough shit. All you retired people who are saving money, well, fuck you. We're not going to let you have any interest income. I mean, what the fuck? I mean, 0% interest rates is a tautology. I mean, if you're saying money won't pay any interest, you're basically saying money has no value, right? I mean,
the quiet part
right?
out loud, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. I mean, it's just, I mean, once again, Walker, you've got me ranting and raving, but it's not that hard to do.
I love it. And that's the thing. I think this isn't just like a situation of, young people trying to buy a house getting screwed. This is a situation of people across the spectrum of all ages.
Everybody's gotten screwed.
Yep.
Everybody.
Yep.
I mean, I can't think of somebody who hasn't gotten screwed. I was talking to my sister last night. She bought a house in the housing bubble, paid market, figuring market was what you got to pay. She put 20% down. She did it all right. Everything normal. And then her job moved her. She had to sell the house. Okay, in 2008, right? And she lost 50% of her house value. And she's not a financial wizard, and she was just buying at the market and then being forced to, how the fuck did that? I mean, that happened because they promulgated the bubble that blew the house up to an unrealistic view, and she paid the market at the time, and then she was forced to move, and she had to, it's so sad. I mean, it's just so sad. And this has happened to people all over the country. I mean, and I mean, you and I have been pretty fortunate. I can't bitch. I mean, I've been fine, and I've got nothing to complain about. But I can see what it's done to the fabric of the country, and I can see how badly it's hurting so many people, and that just makes me sad and angry because I know who did it. I mean, the guy who's got himself on the cover of the Atlantic, called the hero. I mean, Ben Bernanke is a financial terrorist. I mean, he is a bad, bad, bad guy. And, the sooner we all figure that out and realize it, instead of giving him awards and prizes, we criticize him for the behavior and the pain that he's caused, the better.
Yeah. I mean, amen. We've started to just we hold up these, these financial wizards and, we forget that these, the savior is also responsible for causing the problem in the first place. It's like,
that's right.
It's like somebody punches you in the face and then you thank them for handing you an ice pack.
The analogy we all use is, the Fed is an arsonist and a firefighter at the same time. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Breaking windows, then coming along to fix them, and calling that GDP growth, by the way, at the same time.
But by the way, they do just fine. Thank you very much. I mean, somehow they managed to escape the damage themselves. You look at my classmate from business school, Rob Kaplan, who was the head of the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank, and he was insider trading on Fed knowledge.
I was just going to bring that up. Him and Rosengren was the other one, right?
Same thing. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's insane. I mean, that's insider trading at the highest level.
Yeah.
You're literally in control of the money. You're insider trading based on the most material, non-public information that exists. And what happens? Well, I guess I'll just resign now and I'll go back to my 6-figure salary,
Well,
wherever it is.
the other one that was really fun. I mean, and this will be in the book too. Remember Tim Geithner? Do you remember him? You remember TurboTax Timmy?
Oh, okay.
You
Okay.
probably don't. Tim Geithner was I can't remember was he Treasury Secretary when the whole thing went down? No, he was. I can't remember exactly what position he held, but he was a part of the whole troika that did the 2008 bailouts and everything else, and he got caught cheating on his taxes. Okay, and yeah, and he claimed that TurboTax had made a mistake. He claimed that it was an honest mistake and based on TurboTax. So he got the nickname of TurboTax Timmy. I mean, it's just. These people, the rules just don't apply to these guys. I mean, they think they're better than we are, and they can do whatever they want.
And this is, I'd love to, because I want to be conscious of your scarce time. I'd love to transition to a little bit of a white pill, because we've thrown a lot of black pills out there. Pardon my French, but shit is fucked. There's a lot of darkness in this world.
Yeah.
But for somebody who's hearing all this and saying, oh, like this is so much worse than I even thought it was, and wondering like what the fuck do I do? How can I have hope for the future? What makes you hopeful?
I'm incredibly hopeful. Yeah, well, what makes me hopeful? So Bitcoin is the biggest source of hope in the world, first of all, and hanging out with Bitcoiners will get you hopeful no matter what. So my first advice to anybody is if you're not involved with Bitcoin, you got to get involved with Bitcoin. You got to go to Bitcoin meetups. You got to talk to Bitcoin people because we all get it. And I know that's a very, very self-serving comment, but it being involved in the Bitcoin community has changed my life. I mean, I'd be depressed if I didn't realize there's a way out. How fast the way out happens? Well, okay, as we've said, this could be tough. But I'd rather be on the right side. I mean, look, when the American Revolution was going on, I mean, we were losing for a long time. And, but if you were a patriot and you knew you wanted Britain out of your country, you wanted to have your own country, you're willing to say, all right, I'm going to lose and I'm just going to keep fighting for it until we get it right. And that's a similar thing. That was a fourth turning, by the way. So I'm just hopeful because I think fundamentally this is a good country and there are enough people in this country who are fundamentally good people that we will get to the right solution. Like, Churchill said, we always do the right thing after we try everything else in America. We'll get there. And so I believe, the country has not been destroyed yet, but it's in a dark place, and we need some things to happen that are going to to push it in the right direction. But I think those things are happening. I mean, the money is failing, which is therefore going to take away from the power from the bad people, and a new money is going to emerge, and those people who are playing in the new money are going to be do extremely well, and ultimately the people with the new money are going to be able to rebuild the society on a system that's sound. I mean, I've said this before. I think it is true. I think Michael Saylor wants to be president, and I think he probably will be in 2 or 3 cycles. I also think he'll be the richest man in the world. So you heard it here first. But I'm very optimistic, primarily because of the technology and what Jeff Booth talks about. Deflation is a natural thing. We are figuring out how to do everything better, faster, cheaper. AI and other things will make it even better still. The internet is disintermediating the big sclerotic, centralized organizations, and we've now got a perfect form of money that never existed before. So I put all those together, and I'm like, oh boy, this is great. We are going to win, and it's going to be really good. But you can't ignore the fact that getting from here to that great point isn't going to be easy. But look, nothing. You want to stay in shape, you got to work out. Working out hurts, but when you work out, you get in shape, right? And so we want to have a really good society on the other side. Well, we're going to, but guess what? We got to do a lot of work between now and then. And because we know it's correct, we can feel good. I mean, when you're working out, sometimes you think, God, this really sucks. I'm suffering here, but you know what? I got to keep going because I'm committed to doing this shit. And this is proof of work, right? And this is it's a very similar kind of thing, right? We got to do proof of work for money. I mean, obviously the miners are doing it for Bitcoin, but the rest of us have to do it within the society, which is to say we've got to do proof of work to convince all our fellow citizens that we're right, they're wrong, and that this will make all of our lives better. That's kind of how I see it. That's what I think is the most important approach.
Amen to that. And I genuinely believe that in the decades to come, Bitcoiners are going to be become the most powerful, both economic but also cultural force
I agree.
in the world, because I think that much of culture is downstream of money. And I think they sometimes switch their
I think
places
that's
a little
right. And
bit.
and by the way, it's going to place an enormous responsibility on us to be honorable and respectful and kind to those who've suffered and don't have Bitcoin, and to try and not be fiat like. Do you know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not going to live even if my Bitcoin goes to gazillions, I'm not going to live a fiat lifestyle. I mean, I got what I need. I don't need I mean, this whole, when Lambo shit. I mean, Jesus Christ, I have no interest in any of that. I just want to have three squares and peace and time with my family and maybe take some trips and, enjoy things and read books and try and, make charitable donations, help other people out, all those things. I mean, that's to me, that's a great life if you can do that. And, but we will all get there. But yeah, I've said to other friends, I mean, I really do think, I mean, to my kids, in 20 years, you're going to know who had Bitcoin and who didn't. You know what I mean? There's going to be a big difference. And that's why I say to some people, just get off zero. I mean, because you don't want to miss this. I mean, you really don't. I mean, your grandkids are going to say, Jesus Christ, you're aware of that. Why didn't you buy some of that stuff? So,
It's going to be a tough conversation to have if you didn't, and especially for folks in my generation right now. Like we are very, very fortunate to be at this point in our lives. If you're in your your 20s, your 30s, I mean, heck, no matter what age you are, if you're aware of Bitcoin and you start accumulating a little bit of it, whatever you can, that's great. You're very fortunate. But if you're younger right now, and this is something I talk about a lot, is just you have a chance right now. We were handed an amazing technological age. We were not handed a great monetary age.
no.
We were handed a pretty rough one where it's really difficult to get ahead. You
Yeah,
can bust
very.
your ass. You can do everything you're supposed to. You can save, but that savings isn't going to get you that far.
No.
And your investment in your 401k that's just trading index, just sitting in indexes, that's just keeping up with monetary expansion. That's treading
Correct.
water at best.
Well, unless you can use it to buy, FBIT or IBIT, right? I
Right,
mean,
right. Then you've got a darn good shot, and that's the thing.
yeah,
You have these opportunities now, and I
yeah,
think so many people are, again, they understand that something's broken. They
yes,
understand that things are really messed up, and maybe they even get that it's not a red blue thing. Maybe they even get that, but they're still one leap away from realizing, yeah, everything's broken and breaking, but there is a solution out there. You
right,
don't have to despair because there is a lifeboat here. There's a trapdoor. There's a way out of this.
yes,
But
correct.
you have to be humble enough and curious enough to take a look at it. And so that's one of the main reasons why I'm very glad for all the political focus on Bitcoin for that
Absolutely.
reason, because it makes people who may not have paid attention previously, maybe it's the final thing they needed to say, oh shit, Trump's talking about this, RFK's talking about this.
Right.
What am I missing here?
Yeah.
Maybe I need to give this another look.
Right.
And I hope that's the case anyway. I don't
I'm
know.
sure it will be. I mean, look, good ideas spread. They just do. And, this is just, to me, it's just inevitable. And so, my view is people obviously need to try and grok it sooner rather than later. And there'll be a real, I mean, look, I wish I'd grokked it when Max Kaiser did, but I didn't. And so be it. I mean, but someday people maybe look back at me and say, Jesus Christ, the guy was buying coins at, 4,000, 10,000, 20, God, who can imagine? These coins are $2 million a pop. So I don't know. I don't know where they're going to go. But the point is that, yeah, it's, I mean, I've noticed since I heard about Bitcoin and have gone down the rabbit hole, I felt just a whole lot better about everything in life. And to me, it's kind of like, we're all just kind of happy warriors. And, look, from time to time, I get, like any human, I get impatient. I want it to happen faster, as we all do. But, but it really, if you really step back a moment and look at how far we've come and, things like two presidential candidates talking positively about it, it's, and an ETF. I mean, honestly, when the ETF was approved, I was kind of shocked. I thought they were going to figure out a way not to approve the ETF. I really did. And when they approved that, I was like, holy shit, this is a big deal. I mean, that's a really, really big deal. I mean, it hasn't fully expressed itself in the price, but it will. And so, Yeah, to me, there are many, many reasons to be optimistic. There are a few reasons to be concerned about the next few years. It's going to be some rough sledding, but we can all figure out how to handle that if we pay attention and help. And I think the task that we're all called upon as citizens is to try to because we're part of a larger community, we're part of America, we're part of the world, is to try to help other people. I orange pill everywhere I go. I was at dinner the other night. I had a waiter who didn't know about it. You got a cell phone? Yep. Come over here. Okay. Type in Moon. Download a Moon wallet. I gave him his regular tip, and I said, I'm going to give you $10 on Moon. And I sent him to. Oh, really? Thank you. And he said, and we had a 20-minute conversation about it. I explained it to him, and I think he's probably going to go buy the Bitcoin Standard, right, and read the book. And and I mean, how many people does he know? He probably knows 50 people, and right. And so this is how it spreads. And in my view, this is what we all need to do. If we want to try and help people and fix the world, we gotta spread the word on the way to fix the world, because this is what will lead to less wars. This is what will lead to less strife. This is what will calm down the political blue-red bullshit. All of it. It's a much better system. So,
amen. And I think that's a heck of a note to wrap up on. I think.
Okay.
The last thing I would ask you is, so you're writing a book right now. Are you reading anything as a result of writing this book, or that you'd really recommend right now?
Oh gosh, yeah, I'm reading everything. I'm reading a lot of historical stuff. I'm reading a lot of Murray Rothbard. It's gonna have one hell of a bibliography in it. I mean, I think the two books I've recommended a lot on Twitter, and I think just in general that everyone needs to read. I think you need to read The Fourth Turning, because you need to understand societal change. Obviously, you need to read the Bitcoin Standard. The other one, I'm a big fitness freak, and for the older listeners, I would suggest that the only way to get old and not become infirm is to exercise. And the best book on that topic is something called Younger Next Year by Crowley. And I've given away tons of copies to my older friends. Most of them haven't followed the advice, but the point I would make, because I know I'm not young, but I feel like I'm young. And the reason for that is because I get up every morning and I go do a CrossFit workout at 6:30 in the morning. And I think that that has changed my life in a very meaningful way. And so I would suggest to everybody that you find a way to do that, because I think, your later years will be much better if you're physically fit. So those are my top book recommendations.
It's feed your mind and nourish your body at the same time.
Well, and as I know you work out a lot. I mean, as we all know, I mean, working out is proof of work, right? I mean, it's not easy, but you get out of it what you put into it. And I think the sick care system, the depression we have, all the SSRIs, all that shit, that would all go away if everyone did CrossFit.
Yeah,
I really believe that. I mean, or something equivalent. I mean, the CrossFit's the only solution.
At least go for a nice walk in the sunshine.
Absolutely. I mean, walking's underrated. I mean,
it is.
I try and get 10,000 steps. I generally don't make it, but yeah. It's all good.
Well, no, it's great advice. And so, where do you want to send people? I'll link your Twitter in there.
Go to my so as you know, I make a lot of noise on Twitter. Sometimes I'm profane. That's some people have called me unchristian for being that way, but I think I don't know. I never take the name of the Lord in vain, but I do call people bad shit, particularly the Fed. So I'm on Twitter at Lawrence Lepard, and then I have a website called EMA2, www.ema2.com. My partner and I, we write a quarterly letter talking about all this stuff: sound money, macro, where we're going, etc. It's free. So and we got 3 years, on there, so you can read the past ones, you read the most recent one. We just put it out for the June quarter, and you can actually sign up on there. If you go down the bottom of that website, there's a little place you put in your email, and you'll automatically get it. I'll never spam you. We'll never sell that email list. Just 4 times a year, you'll get an email say, "Here's the quarterly letter." That's it. So people should feel free to do that. And then, as I say, I'm working on the book. I hope to have the book out the end of this year. It's almost written, but then there'll be a lot of editing. And I'm just talking to a book agent now. So I've never done this before. This will be my first and probably my only book. So it's a little bit of an experiment. It could slip a tad, but I don't want it to slip, because I think the message is really important. I want to get it out as quickly as I can. So
well, I can't wait to check it out once it's live. Larry, thanks so much for sharing your scarce time.
Thank you, Walker. It's great to see you.
This was a pleasure.
Say hi to your beautiful better half.
I sure will. I sure will. And
You're a
hope to
lucky
see.
guy.
I tell myself that every day. Don't worry.
Yeah, I know. I am too. My wife is absolutely beautiful as well, like yours. So
Yeah,
we're both lucky guys.
all of us men marry up, I think.
Yeah, no,
You know,
absolutely. I'm in way over my head. Many people have told me that, and I say I know it, and she reminds me of it too.
yeah. Like any good wife should.
Yeah, she reminds me. There's a cost to it. Yeah,
Absolutely. Oh,
yeah.
man. Well, Larry, thanks so much for your
Yeah,
time.
likewise.
Appreciate
Enjoyed
it.
it very much,
Yeah.
and I'm happy to come back anytime. I'll talk about sound money anytime, anywhere.
Well, I'll take you up on that.
Okay, feel
All
free.
right. And that's a wrap on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. If you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, head to bitcoinpodcast.net/sponsor. If you are enjoying the Bitcoin Podcast, consider giving this show a 5-star review wherever you listen, or sharing this show with your network. Cut. If you're enjoying the Bitcoin Podcast, consider giving the show a 5-star review wherever you listen, or sharing the show with your friends, family, and strangers on the internet. Or don't, Bitcoin doesn't care, but I always appreciate it. You can find me on Nostr by going to primal.net/walker. If you want to follow the Bitcoin Podcast on Twitter, go to @TitcoinPodcast and @WalkerAmerica. You can also find the video version of this podcast at youtube.com/@WalkerAmerica and @WalkerAmerica on Rumble. Or just go to bitcoinpodcast.net/podcast and find links everywhere. Bitcoin is scarce. There will only ever be 21 million, but Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for spending your scarce time to listen to another fucking Bitcoin podcast. Until next time, stay free.